been involved with teams and had leaders who exclaimed and proclaimed, I guess, how trust was really integral to our team, and trust is important to our customer relationships, and trust was the foundation of our culture, and we need to trust each other more, and we need to be more trusting. And it just became this one-way rhetoric from a few leaders in my life, and that always created cynicism in me. Hey, Jeremy here. This is a really good question that I do get a lot in workshops that I run, and from other people who flick through the cards and then realize that the word trust isn't in the deck. And I have struggled with answering that question in the past, and I have grappled with why it's not in there, because on first instinctive thought, it seems like it would fit in there, right? But what I realized over the years before I created this game was that, and what I came to experience over the years before I created this game, was that I'd been involved with teams and had leaders who exclaimed and proclaimed, I guess, how trust was really integral to our team, and trust is important to our customer relationships, and trust was the foundation of our culture, and we need to trust each other more, and we need to be more trusting. And it just became this one-way rhetoric from a few leaders in my life, and that always created cynicism in me, and I was never able to understand why. But as I've learned more about this and gone through this journey of the deck, I learned more that it frustrated me mainly because it became, like I said there, just a one-way thing. We were proclaiming we needed trust, but nobody was ever talking about how we were going to build more trust, or what steps we needed to take to gain more trust and develop more trust within our team. And then when it got to creating this game, you'll notice there's blank cards in the game, and quite often people would write trust on those blank cards, and that got me thinking as well. And where I've got to on it, and where I got to on it, and why it's not in the game, is that trust to me should be just hygiene, like absolute minimum. And this is where I lean on Jim Collins and Patrick Lencioni's work, where they talk about permission to play values and get in the door values, or hygiene values. Those things that you have to have an absolute minimum. So name me a team where you don't want high levels of trust, or name me a brand or an organization where you don't want high levels of trust. And so it needs to be a minimum. And what I found was, when it was in the game and when people write it into the game, it almost stops us from diving further into that. So what is trust comprised of? And sure, trust has an emotional dimension, but it's, for me anyway, I like to think of it as more of a logical act. So a rational act, a logical act, but it's comprised of other feelings. And so I think trust is probably comprised of confidence, feeling confident and feeling secure. So those are things that make up trust, and trust becomes an outcome of those other emotions, those other feelings, rather than trust being the feeling state itself or the emotion itself. And so by not having it in there, we're nudging people to look for other words and other emotions that might lead to trust. And that's how I now talk about it. I say, so trust's not in there. What are the emotions, what are the feelings that we need to experience that would cause us to trust, or to be more trusting, or to have more trust? So that's the conversation that I now have with teams. Although there are blank cards, right? So people can write the word trust into blank cards, and I allow them to write them in there because I'm a big believer in autonomy and choice. And so if a team really wants to have that in there, I let them have it in there. I don't tell them to take it out. I share my story about why it's not in there, and then hope that might help them see it differently, which doesn't always happen, by the way. Lots of teams and teams I've worked with have kept it in there. And that's fine too, because ultimately the team has to buy into this. They have to be the one to create it, because they'll support what they create. So that's the original thinking behind why trust isn't in there. But then I've just finished reading this really incredible book, and some of you will have heard me talking about this already or seen me post about it, but the book is called You're Not Listening by Kate Murphy. And now I think this book has possibly popped into my top 5 favorite books of all time. And I can't remember who suggested it to me, but I started reading it and I couldn't stop reading it. And in that book somewhere there was this beautiful quote, and I can't recall if the quote is from her or from somebody else, but the quote is that vulnerability precedes trust. Vulnerability precedes trust. And that really stopped me in my tracks, because once again, for a long time, I've been thinking about trust and how we build more of it, and how trust is a logical act, but how we get to that stage. And also for a long time, I've been seeing this game nudge vulnerability. I've been experiencing this game in myself, nudging my own vulnerability, but watching teams become more vulnerable, watching leaders become more vulnerable just by holding the cards up. And what I've come to realize is that this game, if played enough, if used enough, if there's enough moments of conversation about this game and using the game, we're creating vulnerability, and that's going to, over time, build more trusting teams, more trusting leaders. So vulnerability precedes trust. And I think my suggestion for anybody who has this conversation with a team who writes trust in there, share that story about how vulnerability precedes trust, and how this game is helping us to be more vulnerable and share and be open, and over time we will build more trust. And that might be one way that you can steer a team away from having that trust, that hygiene thing, unfortunately, I call trust as a core, and you can go layers below that and explore those emotions and feeling states that are going to lead to trust. So hope that helps, and looking forward to hearing your perspectives on this and some different ideas, because that's only my perspective, and I'll know there'll be other perspectives and other research that suggests otherwise, but hopefully that helps you get inside my mind and understand why trust isn't in the cards.